Hello, Brian Reed here with Firewalls.com. This video request comes to us from Christine out of Pipersville, Pennsylvania, and she wanted us to show her how to set up user authentication to the firewall so that she can control who has access to the internet. Now, with the SonicWALL, there are four areas that we need to touch on. We need to enable the settings. We need to set up users, put them in the appropriate group, enable the authentication method, and finally assign the user groups to rules within the firewall. So let's begin. Within the console, you want to go to Users, then Settings. And in here there are several different options for the authentication. For example, we're going to use the local user group, which is the authentication method built within the SonicWALL. And there's some additional settings here as far as the authentication goes. For example, you can have case-sensitive usernames. You can enforce unique logins so that Sally isn't sharing her username and password with Jimmy. You can redirect users from HTTPS back to HTTP once they get logged in. But in particular, we want to focus on the user session settings. By default, we have an inactivity timeout of 120 minutes, which is 2 hours. And as you can see, we can set it to 5 minutes all the way up to 9,999 minutes. We can enable login session limit, which means that if the user gets authenticated within 30 minutes, we can automatically log that session out. There's an option to show a login status window, which is a pop-up window that appears to the user once they authenticate to the firewall. That way they can see how long they've been logged in, and if they're going to time out, it's going to show them how many more minutes are left before they're logged out. Then finally we have enable disconnect. This is where if the user closes that pop-up window, the SonicWALL will sense that, and the firewall will automatically log them out of the system. So for now, I'm just going to go ahead and disable those settings. You can also, kind of a more advanced technique, is you can create your own login screen for the users to authenticate, as well as you can provide them with a copy of your acceptable use policy for the internet if your organization has one. Also includes an example template. Okay, so once we have these settings set, the next step is to go in and create the users. So under users, we select local users, add user, and here's where we're going to set up their username and a password. And then we'll confirm the password. Now groups, by default, it'll want to put them in everyone and trusted users. Depending on how elaborate you need to get with your policies, you can add additional groups if you want to keep track of like marketing people, salespeople, executives, so on and so forth. Once again, these groups will be used within the firewall policy, as you'll see here in a minute, to either allow or deny access to the internet using certain services, whether it's HTTP, FTP, or so on. So for this example, we'll just leave it at everyone and trusted, and click OK. Now, once we have that set up, we need to go ahead and create our firewall policies that will use those user groups. So we'll go Firewall, Access Rules. And for this case, we'll check out the rule from LAN to WAN, so from your local network out to the internet. And depending on, once again, how your policies are set up, by default, many of the firewalls will have an any allow all for everybody policy. In our case, we've modified that for user authentication here locally. So let's go ahead and edit the firewall policy. And just kind of a quick rundown. The action is allow from your local network to the WAN to the internet. Services, we've created an allowed services group, which is just a group of services that we allow our local users to have, be it HTTP, HTTPS, FTP, DNS, and a few other services that are needed. Source will be any, destination, any, will allow them to go anywhere. And the big key here is users allowed, which is trusted users. So once again, this policy is only going to apply to users who have authenticated to the firewall and for users who are part of the trusted users group. Okay. Then finally, the last step is to enable the authentication on the LAN interface. So if we go to network, we find our LAN configure. And here you see we have user login, and we have both HTTP and HTTPS. And you can go ahead and select HTTPS because we really don't want the users to send username and passwords, even though it's over the local network, to the firewall unencrypted. So we'll make sure we use HTTPS, and you can click a nice little box here that will automatically redirect your user if they try to get the HTTP login to the HTTPS login. Okay, so that covers it for the 4 steps needed to create a basic authentication where your users have to be set up with a username and password, and for that to apply those user groups to firewall policies. Okay, if you have any requests for videos, please use the box over on the left hand side and send us your requests. Okay, have a great day.